Now I'll be talking about shallowing the club shaft in the mid downswing. And the question is, as I've mentioned before, is it's not obligatory to shallow the club shaft. And you see some golfers, from their end backswing, they might be on the turn shoulder plane at the end backswing position, and you'll notice that they have a very active right arm induction maneuver, and you can see the club shaft shallowing down, while other golfers seem just to come down the turn shoulder plane. So the question becomes, is there an advantage to one or the other, or why is there this variation? And I believe the most likely explanation as to why some golfers shallow the club shaft has a lot to do with what they look like at impact and what they do as they go from the P5.5 position to impact. So you have two variations. So here I am at P5.5, and I'm coming down the inclined plane, so the entire left arm flying wedge is coming down the plane, supported by the right forearm flying wedge. And at this point I'm going to be turning towards impact. Notice one option I have is to, as I come down here, is to turn, then the club head goes to the other side as I'm turning my hands to the target. And at impact, you'll notice that my arm is nearly vertical, and I've got a moderate size accumulator number 3 angle. And therefore, I'm coming into impact on a shallow plane, which could be the elbow plane, or even lower than the elbow plane, back to the hand plane, almost as it would rest, coming all the way back with a lot of bend. And golfers who do that, I believe, and like Sergio Garcia is an example, and Hunter Mahan is an example, Ben Hogan, that when they came into impact looking with a vertical arm, then if you think about it, to have the most smooth transition from here to there, they needed to have a shallow club shaft, so that this degree, that this is below the plane of the intact flying wedge, as I showed you before, where I showed you that there's a left forearm flying wedge, which is on a shallower plane than the left arm flying wedge, that it matches this plane because you like to come into impact like that. But there are other golfers like Phil Mickelson with his driver swing, who stands more erect in his swing, and when he comes down in the downswing with his driver, he comes straight down the turn shoulder plane without any shallowing action. And when you look at him at impact, his arm, his lead arm is not vertical, but it's more outstretched towards the body, and the left lead wrist is in ulnar deviation, like that. So he might have been standing with a moderate-sized accumulator in the number 3 angle because he used a low palmar grip. But he allows his arm at impact to go into ulnar deviation, which straightens this, making it a smaller accumulator number 3 angle. So he comes down the turn shoulder plane into impact looking like this and not looking with a vertical arm like that. Therefore, if you come into impact like that, more outstretched, where your hands are much higher, so at address your hands were in this position, but in impact your hands are further outwards and also slightly higher in that position, then it makes sense that you don't have to shift planes because you just come down one plane, down the turn shoulder plane, and then as you release power accumulator number 2, which is in the plane of the flying wedge, it releases, and in the last 12 inches, you just turn and to square the face. And I think that's the most likely explanation as why golfers have this variation in terms of club shaft shallowing. Now, the next issue we have to discuss is, at this point, at point 5.5, this club shaft is on your selected plane. And if you look at Jim, for instance, he's on the turn shoulder plane at P4, and by the time he gets to P5.5, he's on his selected plane. And when he feels comfortable being more or less on the elbow plane. So if he's on the elbow plane, and he's like this, and the intact flying wedge is parallel to his plane, what does he do from here? So we'll examine what he does, but this is what I believe happens. Is at this point, as I explained, the club is releasing. That's the release of the club is the release of power accumulator number 2, and that's happening in the plane of the flying wedge. And because the flying wedge is lying on the inclined plane, which is roughly the steepness of the alpha plane, all he does is he releases it. After he's started the release, he'll apply a certain amount of left forearm supination to rotate towards impact while the club is releasing. And you can see as the club releases, as you rotate it, you can see that the club head passes the hands and you will come into impact like that. But all this motion from here, because here he's going to turn towards the target. As he turns to the target, this stays on the plane. There is no sense of tipping the club over. It's called a tumble action. So if you have a particular steepness of your shaft at this P5.5 position, if you, at this point, supinate your forearm like that, so I'm rotating my forearm counterclockwise, notice it affects the steepness of the shaft. So it's becoming steeper. So if you do that, you're, in a sense, tumbling over the plane. So let's see what Jim does in his real swing, both in slow motion and then he'll do it at a faster speed. But let's start off getting into the P5.5 position. Okay, so there's P5.5. And you can see the club shaft, this was the turn shoulder plane approximately, and the club shaft has been shallowing out from P4 to here. So he's already on the plane that he wants to be through impact here. So what is he going to do at this point? He's still going to continue to pull towards the target. So the butt end is pointing at the ball target line. So he's on plane, the flying wedge is intact, but the club is releasing. As it releases just due to the centrifugal action. Notice that the back of his left hand is parallel to the inclined plane, and then it's going to rotate into impact like that. But if you look at the path of the club, it comes down the plane into impact. There is no sense that you have of tumbling it, right? So let's demonstrate what you feel you're doing and demonstrate a tumble action so people can understand the difference. That's his normal swing. You can look at it from down the line and you see that it's straight. And a tumble, yeah. And can you see what he's doing when you tumble? People who talk about tumbling, and Brian Manzella is a professional golf instructor in New Orleans, and he talks of the tumble. He says, when you come to this position, you need to steepen the club shaft, and he calls that applying a beater torque. A beater torque is an off-plane motion. So if you're on a plane, if you apply a positive beater torque, that's steepening it. If you apply a negative beater torque, that's shallowing the shaft. So he says when you get to this position, you need to apply a positive beater torque. And he says the drill that he encourages people to use is to separate your hands on the grip like this. Put your right hand here. And he says when you get to this position, do this motion. Feel that your right hand is going from under the shaft to on top of the shaft like this. And if you look at it from down the line, the feeling is this motion. But in reality, look what's happening. That's a pronation, my hands facing the ground. And I'm saying you should never be doing that. Because two things. If you were on your plane, why would you even want to steepen it? You see, if you saw what Jim was doing, once you got down to your desired plane, just stay on the plane and let the club release on the plane. There should never be a sensation of tipping it in any way where you feel that your right forearm flying wedge, which is in this position, you're going in the pitch elbow position, with your hands underneath, parallel to the undersurface of the inclined plane to support the flying wedge. You should never have the feeling that you're pronating your forearm to face the ground. And Mike Malaska, another top 100 golf instructor, also describes this phenomenon. He says that when you come in to about this position, he talks about it as a downswing pivot point. That from this position you're going to be pivoting where the club head, which is behind your hands, is going to pivot to be in front of your hands like that. So he demonstrates a motion that looks like this, but watch it. And in his video he does this, but look what happens to the butt end of the club. If you did this, this is way off plane, it's pointing at my thigh. And in reality, we want this to always be pointing at the ball target line. So you see like that? It's pointing at the ball target line while the club releases. So I believe that this type of teaching, where you sort of try and rehearse, even as a feeling, never mind as a reality, of telling someone to do that. Another thing I've heard golf instructors say is that you should have the feeling at this position of getting your right pectoral area to cover the ball, like that. Feeling you going over. But that whole motion of covering the ball and tumbling is an off-plane motion. And I don't believe that one should be doing that. In other words, once you've got to here, you just stay on that plane because you've got to the shallow plane that you desire and let the club release like that. And there should never be a sensation of tumbling. Now, if we get to the 5.5 position like that, yeah, notice that my club face is way open there. People would call that open. Remember that I never call it open because I say if the club face is straight in line with your watch face and the back of your geometrically flat wrist, and that your whole flying wedge is on the plane, you can't think of the club face open. But many people would regard that as open, and they say if it's open there, with the toe of the club at P6, that's P5.5, at P6, when the club is parallel to the ground and the toe is pointed up, they say, well, now how do you close the club face from there? So I believe the way you close the club face from here to impact is through a left forearm supination. So look at it here. So you're in this position at either P.5 or P6. If you look at my watch, it is facing the camera and facing the ball target line. So by impact, it must be facing the target. And that is a left forearm supinatory motion. The left humerus at this position is facing away from the target. It's internally rotated. And when I come into impact, it's still internally rotated. So you don't rotate your humerus to square the face. It's only the forearm motion to square the face. Now, there are some golf instructors who actually believe and teach this, and I've seen this numerous times, and they say, they don't even talk of left forearm supination. They say that what you need to do when you're in this position is you need to close the face. Can you see I'm closing it? And once you've got it somewhat closed, you see how it's doing this? And as you close it like that, then you don't have to think of anything other than turning your body. Because if you've closed it and you can turn it into impact with a body rotation, and they never even mention that you have to supinate. The reality is, I've never seen a golfer come from this position where his watch face is on the inclined plane, and then at impact, if he has a neutral grip, the watch face will face the target no matter what technique you use. So whether you're conscious of using left forearm supination or not, it is happening. So let's try to think, what are these people talking about closing the club face here by doing this? What are they actually doing? Well, this phenomenon is, Brian Manzella refers to it as a twist-away phenomenon. So what he says is when you're in your early mid-downswing, you need to apply a twist away. And a twist away, he says, is applying a gamma torque. And this comes from Steve Nesbitt's teaching, where if you twist the club about the longitudinal axis like this, you see how it's closing and opening, where the club rotates about its own longitudinal axis, that is a gamma torque. So if it closes closed, that's positive gamma torque. If you rotate it open, it's negative. So Brian Manzella teaches the idea, saying that you can start to apply a gamma torque. See how it's closing here in your early downswing, or you could do it in your mid downswing. And if you do it and close it, you see what I'm doing there, closing it. Then, from there, once you've closed it, you just turn into impact. Now, I say that's impossible, and I'm going to explain why. First of all, what is he actually doing biomechanically to close it? And I'm going to come close to the camera because I'm going to try and explain this phenomenon. And basically, if you look at here, I'm holding the club shaft straight out, and you know the toe is facing up. And now what I'm going to do is, if I palmar flex my left wrist, palmar flex it, bow it, arch it, notice that the toe is still pointing up. All I've done is change the angulation relative to my arm. So if I have an intact flying wedge here, if I palmar flex it and bow it, yes, the club has changed its angle relative to my left arm. But notice that the toe hasn't changed its orientation. It is still open, so to speak. It's not closing. So what is he doing to close it? And I believe what he's doing in this twist away maneuver, which I'll show you, is he's applying a finger torque in action. In other words, if you look at your fingers like that and hold your hand out straight like I'm doing, if you activate a muscle in your forearm, which it's called the flexor digitorum profundus muscle in your forearm, and there's 5 tendons that go to the tips of your fingers, as you contract the muscles, the tips of your fingers will do this. They will start to close. And as you close them more, then you make a fist-like grip. So here I am, holding the club like this, and now I'm starting to activate the muscles, and now I can feel my fist squeezing the grip. If I keep on squeezing more, notice what's now starting to happen. Notice that my hand starts to curl under into palmar flexion. Notice that as it becomes palmar flexion, look at the toe of the club. It's closing, but it's not angulating. See? And this closing action, the palmar flexion is, if you just hold it even without a club, make a fist and tighten your finger, curl your fingers under. Notice how I'm bowing my wrist. And while you bow your wrist, if you hold something in your hand, notice how it closes the face. So this positive gamma torque, which Brian Manzella is talking about, so let's say you're at this position, and you activate the muscles. Look at my knuckles on my hand. Notice how it's curling under. And if I do it more actively, notice that I'm also getting a bowed wrist. Look at the club face, which was, let's say I had an intact flying wedge here, and this was on plane. This is pointing at the ball target line, and the club face is parallel to the back of my geometrically flat left wrist, parallel to watch face. If I apply the twist away maneuver, look what happens. You see how it closes? Now, can you do that? Of course you can. Any golfer could do this maneuver, but what I'm saying, why it has no applicability to a real-life golf swing, is it requires the activation of your finger flexor muscles, particularly the ones called flexor digitorum profundus. But the problem is, let's say you close it like that, you would find it extremely difficult to go into impact keeping this muscle activated. Try it yourself to, first of all, do the twist away and grab your forearm here, and you'll feel how hard and tense it is because you've really tightened those muscles. But now the club is releasing at tremendous speeds, right? Let's say in your driver swing. When the club releases, it the centrifugal release of the club is producing a tremendous centrifugal outward force, which will stretch these muscles. And I've never seen a professional golfer who can keep that twist-away maneuver into impact. I've never seen a golfer come into impact where this club face looks closed like that. It looks like this at impact, even if they have a bowed wrist. So, you know, Dustin Johnson or Jordan Spieth comes into impact looking like this. But this is facing the target. It's certainly not looking where the knuckles are under like that. So I'm saying it's to me, it's an artificial technique, this idea of using a twist away. And I've never seen a professional golf. I've seen professional golfers use it temporarily as they come around the corner. And I'll discuss that when I discuss Gary Woodland's swing, the technique that he uses. You see there, it's closing. But it only closes for a while. By the time you get to 6.5, it's almost not closed anymore. And then by impact, that phenomenon disappears. So from a golf swing perspective, and we're talking about optimum golf swing biomechanics, I don't think that you should ever think of using a twist-away maneuver to square the face. I believe the reality is that when you're at this position, P5.5, and you can see the club face looks open, but really it's parallel to your inclined plane, you're going to have to supinate it. And remember, you are turning your body, so you might be, shoulders will be here, P5.5, and maybe they 10, 20 degrees open at impact. So there is a certain amount of closing as your body rotates, but your body only rotates about 20, 30 degrees. And this has to rotate off the plane to square. It's well over 90 degrees, maybe 120 degrees of rotation. So the reality is if you use a neutral grip, which many golfers use like myself and Jim, you're going to have to supinate it. So the question is, do you do this consciously or does this just happen without thinking? Now, there's a golf instructor called A.J. Boner who teaches what he calls a hand crossover release action. And he says that when you come down and the club face is open, that you need to do this. See how my hands are crossing over? My left forearm is supinating. My right arm, as it straightens, is pronating. And you come through impact like that. By the end of this point, your left palm is supinated where it's facing the sky like you're catching raindrops in your hand. And he teaches that as the optimum way to go through impact. And he calls it a hand crossover release action. And I believe that's very problematic. Because if you at this point apply a lot of muscle force, either with your left forearm supinate the muscles to try and actively turn it, supplemented by your right forearm pronate your muscles, so they're both doing this, then what you're going to do is you're going to just roll over like this through impact. And you end up looking like this. This is a rollover. And I believe you don't want to do that. So what we really want to do, we want to supinate it, obviously, because we have to square the face. But the amount of supination is just enough to square the face. And I would say that it should occur almost passively. You shouldn't feel you have to do an active motion with your arm. And the other problem, if you suddenly got this idea when you're coming down your swing, that you have to do a rotatory motion actively, and you started too soon, and here, can you see how it tumbles the club shaft? So the first thing you've got to understand is the club must release first. That's the release of power accumulated number 2. It releases, and only after it's released and it's got to about P6.5, P6.7, that's when you should think of rotating. So any really active left forearm supination happens in the last 12 to 8 inches before impact. So the only amount of supination you need here, as you turn the corner from here, is just enough to get it started, like that, and then let it happen. So I'm going to get Jim to demonstrate this, and I would ask him the question, do you use any active force to square it?
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. It just happens, right?
Absolutely.
So let's just look at his swing, because he has such a great golf swing, and he'll do it in slow motion. Describe me what's happening. So go down slowly, P5.5. Now the club releases, and it's turning, but he's not consciously turning, right? And then it's squared, impact. Notice, go back again, how he's staying on plane. Notice the intact flying wedge, and the whole intact flying wedge rotates. So it depends on rhythm, but notice there's no sense of tumbling. Just go back. Notice as he goes down the right shoulder, he's back. He's not coming over with his right shoulder. See, look at that. If he came over, he'd tumble the whole club shaft over. So he's just staying back. The club releases and can impact. Now watch his right arm motion, because I'm going to address the second question. What does the right arm do? Could it assist in this smooth release where you square the face, which Homer Kelly called the release of power accumulator number 3? And the answer is it can be extremely useful if you do it correctly. So how do you do it correctly? So the first thing you need to understand is you've come down to this position with your elbow in the pitch elbow position, and at this point, whether it's 5.5 or P6, notice that my palm is facing skywards, right? So it's supinated. From here to impact, it goes from supination to neutral. So at impact, my radial bone is in line with my antecubital fossa, so that's neutral. At no point in my downswing does the right forearm pronate. Pronation can happen here after impact if you use a full roll release like that, if you want to roll it onto the plane. But in the pre-impact phase, you go from supination to neutral. Now, Brandel Chambly, in his book, The Anatomy of Greatness, also had the same belief. And I spent a long time in my review paper, when I wrote a book review paper on his teaching, explaining why I thought he was wrong, because he said that if you are at this point in your golf swing, you must have the feeling that your right palm from here to here faces the ground. See? If you were really doing that, you would be pronated. But if you look at professional golfers, they don't look like this. They look like this. So if you look at Dustin Johnson, here, this is what he is. Look at this, he's facing the sky. No? And the way to know whether you're supinated or pronated is very simple. You draw a line on your radial bone here just above the wrist, and another line in your antecubital fossa. And then if this line here is turned in that direction, away from the target, which means that the palm is facing this way, that's supination. If you were pronated, you would look like this. But no golfer looks like this at this position. They look like this. And then it starts to pronate. So it's pronating towards neutrality. So when you come to impact, you're neutral. Now, can you see how this helps to release power accumulator number 3? I mentioned to you before, in this position, you still have a bent elbow in the pitch elbow, but it feels like skipping stones, like this. So from here, your right arm's going to straighten. So when you get into impact, it's not perfectly straight yet, because that happens after impact, but it's straightened significantly. Your right hand is still dorsiflexed. But in your late downswing, you do this motion. So you're going from supination to neutrality. And when you do that, I mentioned to you, there was the coupling point in your hand, that you could press either on the left thumb, which is above the coupling point, or you could press against the shaft below the coupling point. So what one would do, if you were going to use the right hand to synergistically help square the club face here like I'm doing is use the palm, you know, the lifeline of your palm, which is over your base of your thumb, to press. So as your right arm straightens and it goes from supination to neutral, can you see it's timed with the forearm supination? See? My left forearm is supinating, and if this is done at the same time, it can help you to more efficiently square the face, because they're working in perfect symmetry, like that. So let's watch your swing, because when I watch it, I see you doing that, right?
Uh-huh.
So to do that well as Jim, you have to get your elbow into its pitch elbow position by P5.5. See where his elbow is in this beautiful position in right at the front hip. Notice his radial bone here is well rotated clockwise relative to his antecubital fossa, which is necessary because look how shallow his club shaft is. At this point, it's going to release, and then the back of his glove is going to have to rotate to square by impact. But while that's happening, watch how his right elbow straightens, and this arm is now going from neutral, it's moving in a pronatory direction. But notice at impact that his palm is facing the target. It's not facing the ground. So go to P5.5, face on view. P5.5, the palm is facing at this angle up there. By impact, his palm will be facing the target. So it's moving in a pronatory direction, but it's moving from supination to neutral. It never faces the ground. If you have this concept at any time, whether it's here, doing a motion where this palm faces the ground, you don't see this in professional golfers. I mean, I've plotted the swings of many professional golfers. I use particularly like Adam Scott and Henrik Stenson as my role models, and I've demonstrated very conclusively exactly what's happening. And the person who keeps it supinated for the longest is Dustin Johnson. And the reason why he does it is that Dustin Johnson gets his elbow so far ahead here with so much right lateral bend that he's almost at impact and it's still supinated, and then it rotates like that. So he stays supinated here and then squares at impact. And this just happens naturally. You almost don't have to consciously think of it. But the feeling of skipping stones is this motion. Notice that the palm is facing sky. You never do this. This is an overhand throw-in motion. So if you were a pitcher and you throw through this way, or a football quarterback throwing a pass, he makes a motion that looks like that, right? That's definitely overhand, right? But in a golf swing, if you're using a left arm swing in action, where the flying wedge comes down the plane and the whole flying wedge, watch, rotates into impact, then the right forearm to support it is in a pitch elbow motion. And then in the last bit, this is called right forearm paddle wheeling into impact. And it's like a canoe paddle going in. But while it's paddling in with your elbow just near your hip and then straightening, while it's paddling, notice it goes from supination to neutral. And then with pressure against the left thumb, you can help smooth out your release of power accumulator number 3 to square the face. But very little force is required. In fact, in a way, one's not even conscious of it. In other words, you are conscious of keeping your flying wedge intact and letting the club release. But all these biomechanical phenomena that I'm now describing happens on a subconscious level, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to get Jim to show his swing, regular swing, facing that way, because I want you to look at how his club squares itself. And there's no sense that he's, and you could just do it faster and faster. and it's squaring in itself.
Now, Jeff, Ben Hogan said that he wished he had 3 right hands.
Yeah.
So how would you?
So the question is, what could you do if you had 3 right hands, realistically? A lot of people believe that you can increase your swing power to get what they call the hitting zone. And a lot of people say, I get down in my swing, and when I get to about waist level, I feel now I can hit, and with the right arm. But what could you really do? As I said, if the right arm at this position does you can call it a throw action, or a stone skipping action, or a baseball underhand pitching motion, and you did it very actively, could you theoretically hit the ball further? And I would argue that you couldn't, because where would you be applying the force? As I said, you could apply force above the coupling point or below the coupling point. And if you apply it below the coupling point by straightening your wrist while you straighten your arm, you're likely to flip like that. All right, you don't want to flip. If you applied it to the left thumb, you could increase the speed of motion of the left hand, yes. So if you were pulling down and you suddenly straightened it, you could increase the speed of motion. But the reality is that's a disadvantage, not an advantage. Because if you have this idea from here that you're going to hit the ball further by moving your left hand faster into impact, you're going to run into the problem where your hands outrace your club. Remember, the club is releasing to catch up to your left hand through the phenomenon of the double pendulum swing action. And in fact, the reality is if you look at 3D graphs, where they use these 3D machines to measure what's happening in golfers' swings, they have discovered that the left arm speed reaches its peak roughly here, and then it actually slows down in the last 12 inches before impact. And in fact, that's necessary because it takes some time to roll into impact. And if you've got this idea that you're just going to get your hands through fast, you'll get your hands into impact, and this club will be so far behind that you won't have caught up, and you also won't have had time to square it, so your club face will be open, and you'll probably push slice all your balls to the side. So I've never heard a convincing theory as how push pressure applied by the right hand, if you had extra power, could actually be beneficial. And in fact, the research that I encouraged Jim to do was to measure the amount of push pressure being exerted by the right hand at pressure point number 1 and pressure point number 3 during this time period of golf swing, using pressure sensors. And hopefully he will be able to get permission to buy these sensors for his department and do this golf research. And after all these years that I've been trying to get a golf researcher interested in this idea, hopefully this will reach fruition. And then we will know the real truth, to what degree the right arm in this late phase from here to impact is applying push pressure. It's my personal belief it is applying push pressure in a subset of golfers, but it's only applying enough pressure to keep up with the left arm. Because if you look at this, I'm not even a good golfer, and I can move my left arm and swing the entire flying wedge at speed. So from here to here, look how fast I can move it. And no matter how hard I try with this arm, it's even hard to keep up. And at the speed you swing, don't you get the feeling that your left arm is leading?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you would not benefit by having an extra 2 right hands or right arm.
In fact, Ben Hogan said that he pulls as much with his left arm than he does with his right.
Yeah. So if you read his book, even though he said, I wish I had 3 right hands, in his book, The 5 Lessons, he very distinctly says, when he talks about the feeling of the swing, and I'll show you, if you would give me that ball, he said the feeling that you have when you perform in a golf swing, he says the feeling is like throwing a basketball two-handed. Now, this is not a basketball, but this is an exercise ball, a medicine ball. But it's got two handles. You can pull with the left hand, and you could grab it with the right hand, and you could push, and you could pull and push. So just imagine you were doing a two-handed basketball pass from here, like this. Ben Hogan said the feeling that he has when he releases the club is the feeling of throwing the basketball with two hands, as I'm doing. But when he said you do that, he said make sure that you lead with the lead hand, and that the lead hand is pulling as much as the right hand is pushing. In other words, if you perform this, now watch what would happen if I pushed more than I pulled. See, one thing I could do is I could twirl the ball that way, or I could just push into impact like that. But if you feel that you're pulling the club, like we demonstrate, then the amount of pushing you do in the two-handed basketball pass is synchronized. The two hands are moving at the same speed. That's the way. Look at this. It's a sense of rhythm. And I have another little ball, which, do we have it here?
No, I didn't.
We don't have it, but I'll demonstrate it, where you could put a ball between your arms, and you go back and through, and the ball stays between your elbows or between your forearms, and the feeling in your downswing is the hands and the body are rotating at the same rotational velocity. So it almost feels here your chest is facing there, here your chest is facing there, after impact your chest is facing there, and that your arms are moving with your body in pure synchrony and rhythm. And you could demonstrate that in your swing action. Show you the rhythm of your swing and describe how it feels to you. Yeah, although you might think that the arms are outracing the body, if you look at it carefully, you'll see that it's moving in perfect synchrony. In other words, as his body rotates, the arms move ahead of the body. One would never have the feeling of either in your downswing rotating your body so that your hands are behind you, because then you're trapped. You should never have the feeling where your body sort of stalls in your late downswing and your hands pass your body like that, because then they're going to race through and roll over like that. So there's a distinct feeling of rhythm in the swing, like that, right?
Absolutely.
The next topic I wanted to discuss is the topic of low point. Now, low point, I really do believe, has a fixed position if you're performing the golf swing correctly. And Homer Kelly in the golfing machine described low point as being under the left shoulder socket. So where is your left shoulder socket at the time of impact? So if you stand here and get to your impact position, if you look at him at impact, notice the shoulder angles like this. This shoulder is higher than this one. The reason why it's higher is two phenomena. Remember, in the late downswing, he straightened his leg, which means that the left pelvis is higher than the right pelvis. That's a positive O factor. Plus, this part of your body feels stretched out. And by doing that, and you come into impact, you've got the maximum radius of your swing at this point when the club shaft has caught up to your left arm. So if you had a T here, that's where you would hit the ball, roughly under your shoulder socket. And that's the low point of your swing. Now, the low point of the swing and the low point of the hand arc are not the same thing. So, if you were performing a swing, and you're coming down like this, the low point of your hand arc path is opposite your right thigh. That's when you're about there. Then notice what's happening at this point. Notice that the hands are going upwards somewhat. Why does it go upwards from there? And the reason is, between here and impact, the left leg is straightening, pelvis is going up, this side of my body is extending, and my left shoulder socket is going up and away. So at impact, you look like that. And that up extension of the body and elevation of the left shoulder between P5.5 and impact, P5.5 and impact, upward motion causes the hand-on path, which reaches its nadir, its lowest point here, to move up at impact. Now, if you say if it's moving up, how can low point be opposite your left shoulder socket? And the reason is that although your hands are moving slightly upwards in the last 18 inches of your downswing, your left shoulder is moving upwards up like that, which moves your hands up, but the club is releasing. And the timing of the club release is time coordinated with this biomechanical movements. So when the club reaches, catches up to the left arm, that's the exact moment when you've already got your shoulder socket up to its optimum position. Now if you didn't do that, let's presume you released the club like this, so it caught up to the left arm at impact, but you didn't do this motion. Then you'd likely hit behind the ball, which we call hitting it fat. And that's a common reason why people hit it fat, is they don't have this correct motion. So I want you to do it, show how the left side of your body extends in the late downswing and through impact. Can you see how straightening of the leg? Look how the shoulder goes up. Look at his hand path at stop there. So his hands at about this level and go up. And notice that the hand path goes from here upwards a bit. And that has to be synchronized. Now, the question is, in this motion where it goes up, what's the benefit of it? The one benefit is that when you swing in the golf club and it's releasing with tremendous speed, this centrifugal release of the club generates a tremendous centrifugal or tangential force outwards. And they say that it measures 100 pounds at the time of impact. So if you didn't have a centripetal force pulling inwards, then your hand-on path, instead of coming up from here to here, would actually go more downwards. It would pull you towards the ground. So to get the hand-on path to go slightly upwards, you've got to generate a pulling up force to counteract the centrifugal force. But you don't do it by pulling up on the club. So Brian Manzella says that when you get to this position, you must feel from here that you're pulling up with all your might. And I say, what does it mean to say you're pulling up? I'm not conscious of pulling up on the club with my hands. The pulling up works biomechanically through the motion of the body. It's the motion of the shoulder socket that's going up and away in the late downswing and through the follow-through that causes your whole left arm to go up. Now the question is, how much should it go up? There's a great variation in golfers in terms of how much it goes up. And if you have an exaggerated up motion, where in the last downswing you extend your left leg, extend your shoulder as far as you can, elevate your clavicle, and get on your toes like this, then you'll have, like Jim is doing there, does it well. If you face the camera here, because I want people to see how much you're elevating and how your hands move up. So if you have this extra upward motion, it's been shown through golf research experiments that it can increase your club head speed by about 5% through a phenomenon called parametric acceleration. And you would think to yourself, well, maybe that's a good thing to do. And in fact, long drive competitors use this because from them, if they can get an increase in club head speed of 5%, and let's say that's an extra 5 yards for every 100 yards of distance, then if they're hitting the ball 400 yards, they can get extra 20 yards of distance. They might win the competition with that extra 20 yards. So it's not unusual to see long drive competitors have so much extension that they become airborne through impact. You see them jump up off the ground and airborne. Of course, I don't like to see that happening because I believe if you have so much parametric acceleration where your hand-on path moves up so abruptly in your late downswing, you have to deal with the problem of hitting it on the sweet spot. Because if you miss the sweet spot, you might lose 20 yards of distance if you hit it off the toe or the heel as a result of an off-center hit. But the long drive competitors are very skilled at still hitting it on the sweet spot. The other group of golfers who I see using this technique are lady golfers, female golfers on the LPGA tour. So if you look at Lexi Thompson as an example, she's, and I think Natalie Gubbles, is that, and they at impact, they look like they're standing on their toes with a driver. They don't necessarily do their short iron swing, right? So you could demonstrate how they look. I'm not as flexible. See, they're definitely right on their toes. Heels are off the ground. And their left leg is abruptly straight through impact. Now you can use that. It's perfectly acceptable to use it. But I don't believe that concentrating too much on parametric acceleration is a necessity. Certainly not a necessity for your short iron swings and your mid iron swings. You could use it for your driver if you think you want to gain an extra 5% driving distance. But I don't believe you should exaggerate it. And Tiger Woods had this phenomenon where he went so much down in the early downswing and he popped down with increased knee flexion and increased hip joint flexion. Then he abruptly straightened it and he looked like this, and you saw his head do this motion. And I believe that it becomes a huge timing problem when your body is moving up and down, bobbing up and down to such a degree, because then you deal with the issue of can you always still hit it on the sweet spot. So I believe if you use this biomechanical phenomenon that induces parametric acceleration of the club head, then you must do it smoothly. And it must be coordinated with the rest of your swing motion so that you remain a consistent ball striker.
And Jeff, one other point is when you should let the shoulder come up.
Yeah.
Right?
So
some golfers will do it right from the beginning.
Yeah.
That's way too early.
Yeah. So what I did once, I plotted the motion of the left shoulder socket in a number of professional golfers, in particular Adam Scott and Tiger Woods, to see how the left shoulder moves. And to my surprise, because I didn't anticipate this, that go to your in-back swing position. It's got more rotation. That the left shoulder socket, as I'm traced it from P4 to P5 to 5.5 and so on, was always moving towards the target to about here. From P5.5 onwards, I noticed that the shoulder socket almost went straight up and no longer forward. And that answers the question when it should happen. It happens almost naturally if you get to P4.5, from then it's moving up. The good thing about it is it slows the club head down, or the left arm down. So remember, the left arm is propelled to a large degree by the forward targetwards motion of the left shoulder socket, which is pulling the left arm. And of course, it's much more complex with the left arm's moving downwards because the whole power package down. But in the targetwards direction, it's by the shoulder sockets moving. Then when you get to P5.5, as this shoulder socket moves up, the forward pulling is obviously less because it's not moving targetwards anymore, and it's moving up. And that allows the left arm to slow slightly before impact, and that gives time for you to square the club face. Okay. Is there any issue in the downswing? I haven't discussed it, you think?
Well, I like what Lynn Blake said on his DVD, that there's no now in the golf swing.
Yeah.
So many times we want to apply something really quick. And I love the quote where they say, "All quick and jerky motion leads to improper execution." And so this is just, it's a process.
Yeah.
And obviously we don't want to let this left shoulder do this early, but, there's no hurry.
Yeah.
We just let it unfold. And so that's...
So I've been doing a description of the golf swing piece by piece, showing you what's happening biomechanically. But this is just for you to think through the process of what is happening so that you can execute it well. But in your real life golf swing, you don't think of any of these issues. But one thing you need to think of is rhythm and a non-jerky motion. And you should also allow the golf swing to evolve naturally. By what I mean is get your end backswing position face on. I mentioned to you it starts from the ground up, so he rotates the pelvis. Then he's adducting the arm. Then, hang on slowly, the shoulders are going to rotate. But they rotated, but the arms haven't released yet. Right? The distance between the arms and the shoulder is still the same between P4 and P5. Then between P5, the arms will start to travel faster. Then you get to this position, the club will release due to the laws of the double pendulum. Then the right arm will straighten, and it's paddle wheels the right forearm towards impact. All this is a sequence. In TGM terms, Homer Kelly said, you release power accumulator number 4 first, then 2 releases, and then finally 3 to square the face. And you can't do this out of sequence. You can't ever think of releasing 3 before you've released 4. And you can't release 2 before you release 4. The swing is a natural evolution. And if you understand when I talk about all the principles, it should occur naturally. And to me, Jim is a perfect exemplar of a well-executed golf swing, right? Because it's not hurried up, it's smooth, and he's following all the principles we've talked about. So let's just watch, at this end here, how this flying wedge stays intact throughout his entire downswing in slow motion. So he's got a flying wedge intact, geometrically flat left wrist. Do it really slow. It's still intact, but it's shallowing out. But this is still and it's also on plane, pointing at the ball target line. Now the club's releasing, but it's releasing while the flying wedge is intact. Then it's rotating into impact, still has an intact flying wedge, still the club shaft's on plane. And as he swings faster, notice that all this stays the same. Now do it towards the camera because I want people to see what it looks like from an upline view. Because this Brian Manzella teaches a hand release action, which I'll discuss when I start to talk about hand release actions, called rotation about the coupling point. I mentioned to you the coupling point is the point between the hands, and he believes that there must be rotation about this point, which means that the club must pass the hands and you should bend your left wrist after impact like that. And I'm saying no, you shouldn't do that. It's too much motion like through impact, whether it's flipping or rolling, you don't want to do that. You want to keep a firm, intact, geometrically flat left wrist. So look at this here. So when you look at it from down the line, you should have the feeling that at this point from here to about there, that the left wrist is not bending, that the left arm is traveling at the same angular rotational velocity as the club shaft. And Jim does it very well, so he's going to swing the upline towards the camera.
This way?
Yeah, first in slow motion, the feeling you get by the time you get to impact and through impact. See it out there? And then do the whole swing. So,
yeah, one thing that Henrik Stenson does is this club will point upward right in this position. So if you look at Hendrick's swing, it doesn't look like this. And it doesn't look like this. It just looks like right neutral.
And that section, which I'm going to describe when we deal with hand release actions, which is such a complex topic and so important, I'm going to discuss that in depth. But I just want you to look at the entire downswing through impact. Is the smoothness, the rhythm, the intake flying wedge, the on-plane motion, and the consistency. And if you do it down the line now, the other direction, I mentioned to you, yes, there are many ways you could perform a golf swing. You could do like Jim Furyk, take it up there and then loop it. You know, you could take it like Rory Sabatini with a horizontal arm and very steep shaft and then shallow it. But isn't it easier just to think, like I said with the tennis, you just go back, up there, up, and then come essentially down the same path. And this is what I think Jim does so well. If you look at it from down the line, he goes up and he comes not down the same plane. Remember, he has a club shaft shallow in action. And while he's doing this, I did think of one thing that I didn't discuss, which I'm now going to discuss, and that is the concept of where should your right forearm be in your laid downswing. So look at this here. The golfing machine teaching, by Homer Kelly, talked about how the right forearm is on plane with the shaft. Now, I mentioned to you, if I stand like this, my right forearm is steeper than my shaft. But if you stood more outstretched like that, you could picture a situation where at address it looks like it's on the same plane. And if you performed a swing where you didn't change planes, you could do it, and I'll do it with two badminton rackets. You could perform a golf swing with two badminton rackets, like this. Thank you. Look at it this way. I mentioned to you that this is the flying wedge with the left arm. So it goes up there and comes down and rotates into impact. Now to match that, look at the right forearm. Notice I'm going out the same way. So if you would say the golf machine teaches the concept of the right forearm coming down to impact on the plane of the shaft, like this. Now, notice how still my head is and that the right shoulder motion is the same. And a golfer who looks like that is Bryson DeChambeau, who's just joined the tour. And he has what's called a zero plane shift swing. In other words, his club shaft goes up the same plane and comes down the same plane with no shift. And under those conditions, the golfing machine principle applies, that your right forearm comes on plane. But what happens if you decide to shallow the club shaft from the turn shoulder plane to the elbow plane with right lateral bend like Jim does? Then your forearm's not going to be doing a motion that looks like this. It's going to be doing a motion where your forearm is more horizontal. So let's look at Jim's forearm at P5.5. Okay, go further down. Notice how his right shoulder's going down, he's got right lateral bend. Go a little further. Now look at this forearm. It's very horizontal. It's not angled in this direction. Get towards impact. And therefore at impact, this is steeper than his club shaft, right? So it's in a different plane. And notice there's a certain degree of ulnar deviation, because in the golfing machine, they say you should have a level wrist. It's not ulnar deviated, not radially deviated. You go up and you keep your left wrist level. And I believe that that principle, which makes a lot of sense, only makes sense if you have a zero plane shift swing. But if you decide to swing down like Hunter Mahan, Keegan Bradley, Dustin Johnson, and Jim, then human biomechanics dictates that you're not going to have those same relationships, that your left wrist is most likely to be in ulnar deviation and impact, and your right forearm is not going to be on the club shaft plane. And I find this perfectly acceptable. As long as the right forearm performs its functions, and as I said, it supports the flying wedge on the end backswing, it supports the flying wedge coming down plane, it helps you by the pitch elbow motion to shallow the shaft, it helps you pitch elbow motion here to get into this position ready to supinate towards impact. If you're doing that all correctly and moving the whole flying wedge smoothly into impact, it's not important that you follow the golfing machine principle as rigidly described, I think, in the TGM book. I'm much more flexible in terms of exactly the plane of the right arm motion. Now, there's one other issue I'm going to discuss in the downswing, and I mentioned to you before how much I've been emphasizing the flying wedge concept. So watch here. Notice that this racket face is facing the target. I have an intact flying wedge. I go back and you can see the whole flying wedge rotates a unit onto the plane. And to do that, I had to rotate my watch face through a left forearm pronatory motion onto the plane. Then in the downswing, you come down the plane to about here, and then you're going to supinate to square the face. That applies to a neutral grip. So the question comes, the other point I've been emphasizing endlessly is that if you look at yourself at any point in the swing, that your club face, which now it's the racket face, must always be in a straight line, or I call it parallel to your watch face. So let's look at your swing, because Jim has a neutral grip. Wherever you stop and look at the club face is straight in line, parallel to his lower forearm. Come further down. Here it's still there. You can never call this being too open. And when he gets to the P6 position, the toe is up, and notice the club face is exactly in line with the logo on his glove. That applies to a neutral grip. Now the question becomes, what happens if you decide to use a strong left-hand grip? So I'm going to get Jim to have a strong left-hand grip. You would stand in the center and adopt it. So to adopt a strong left-hand grip, you stand with your hand like this, and you almost turn it not quite 90 degrees, but maybe 60 to 70 degrees, as much as you can, over the top of the shaft through a left forearm pronatory motion. That's before address even. So your right humerus is internally rotated to start with a neutral forearm. Then pronate your forearm so that your watch face faces the camera, ball target line. And put your hand over so that your thumb is at 3 o'clock position. Then if you look at the logo on his glove, it's now facing the camera or the ball target line. But his club face is facing the target. So if you would say, what's the relationship between the club face and his watch face? Remember, the watch face and the logo are more or less the same. And you can see this is closed by about 60 degrees. Now let's look at what happens in the swing. Let's do a down the line view. So it's closed, say, 60 degrees there. Now he's going to go to the P2 position. Because his left forearm was pronated at address, to go from P1 to P2, he didn't have to pronate it forward. He just goes straight back. Notice that this is closed. The toe is not pointing up. In other words, this concept of the toe pointing up only applies to a neutral grip. And if you stop, say, P2.5 or P3, look at him here. This has, he didn't have to pronate it to get it on the plane, right? Because it just went up the plane. when it goes up the plane, if you look at the club face at any time point in the backswing, it's always closed by the same amount relative to the back of the it's not a geometrically flat left wrist because he's turned in this direction. Another way of perceiving this phenomenon is, we talked about the flying wedge. So at address, if you were holding the golf club like this in your hand, this is your flying wedge, like this. And you had the perception that you're going to pronate your left forearm as you go back, so you can get the entire fly wedge onto whatever plane is comfortable. Then you come down the plane and rotate into impact. But if you adopt a strong left-hand grip, you've turned your hand in this direction, which means that the flying wedge should be thought of as turning with your hand, see, like that. So when you go up, your flying wedge is not here, it's here, conceptually. So when you go up, you're just taking your flying wedge up the plane and down the plane. So if you're coming down the plane, do you have to use a left forearm supinate reaction to square the face? And the answer is no. That release of power accumulator number 3 that I described applies to a neutral grip. But if you have a strong grip, you're going to come down the plane with the ulnar border of your hand facing the target. So when you come into impact, it's the ulnar border that faces the target, and the logo on your glove and your watch face is still facing the ball target line. So let's look at it in reality. I'll just put this flying wedge aside. Okay. So there, come to P6. So at P6, the logo on his glove is parallel to the ball target line. Notice that this is closed. It's closed by 60 degrees relative to here. And from here, he doesn't have to rotate his glove. The club just releases. So power accumulator number 2 releases, but the club leaves. Notice at impact that this faces the target. Now what do you do after impact? And I'll discuss that more when we talk about hand release actions. But this is why I find a strong left-hand grip uncomfortable for me, is if you come into impact with the ulnar border facing, it's very hard to go further and roll. So what you see a lot of long drive competitors who use a strong left-hand grip do, there's 2 things you could do. And one technique of following through when you use a strong left-hand grip like Zach Johnson is to use the helicopter finish, where he goes through impact with both arms outstretched like that. See, that's biomechanically comfortable. And if you look at Zach Johnson, he finishes like that. And in other words, he doesn't roll at any time. He goes out like that. Now, Jamie Sadlowski, the long drive competitor, who uses a strong grip, what he does after impact, he allows this to ulnar deviate and bend like that. So you see how it's bending up like that. And he's got very flexible wrists, so you can allow it to bend because this is after impact. But it actually goes into ulnar deviation and bends at the same time. The bending is due to a certain roll motion. But this roll motion that you see like this is something you see in people who use a weak or neutral grip. But if you use a strong grip, you wouldn't use that. You would more likely, like Zach Johnson, finish out like that. He's a perfect example of finishing with both arms out like that. Finishing like that. So the important thing if you adopt a strong left-hand grip is, I've been talking about all the time, look at your end backswing, make sure everything's in line. That only applies to your neutral grip, because you need to conceptualize this in your mind, that if you adopt a strong left-hand grip, that the club face is going to be closed relative to your back of your hand by the same amount throughout the swing. It's actually simpler to perform in the sense that if you turn your hand this way at address, you just go up to your desired plane and then down this desired plane with no need to rotate. That's the simple part for me, although I find it biomechanically uncomfortable to do.
Yeah, I find it uncomfortable as well.
Okay, so at this point, I think we discussed most of the issues related to downswing, and I'm going to move on to something that I find extremely interesting, and that's hand release actions through the impact zone. And if I have made any contribution to the golf research literature or the golf instructional literature, is my work on hand release actions, where I've thought very carefully about what do professional golfers actually do in reality. And they use a technique which is called the drive hold hand release actions. But that's such a big topic, I'm going to discuss it as a topic in itself, which will be the next topic that I discuss.